Welcome to this explainer, tracing the absolute roller coaster shift from elegant Art Nouveau to raw Expressionism in early 20th century Vienna. We are diving into an incredibly pivotal moment in art history today. It's a time when three absolutely legendary artists completely upended how we look at the human condition. We'll be exploring exactly how art went from these beautiful, shimmering gold decorations to visceral, intensely psychological portraits that quite literally laid the human soul bare.
Just consider the sheer defiance packed into this quote. If you cannot please everyone with your deeds and your art, please only a few. To please many is bad. The artist Gustav Klimt actually embedded those exact words from poet Friedrich Schiller right into his 1899 painting Nuda Veritas, which fittingly translates to the naked truth. And honestly, it perfectly sets the tone for an entire generation of artists. They were completely done with painting pretty pictures just to appease the masses. They were ready and willing to scandalize polite bourgeois society if it meant finally getting to the absolute truth of human emotion.
So, to map out how this wild rebellion happened, here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, Vienna's artistic rebellion. Second, Klimt, the golden mentor. Third, Schiele, the raw prodigy. Fourth, Kokoschka, the radical survivor. And finally, the Expressionist legacy.
All right, let's jump right into Part 1, Vienna's Artistic Rebellion.
And Part 2, Klimt, the golden mentor.
You know, to truly grasp the art of this era, we really have to understand the city itself. Turn-of-the-century Vienna was a total pressure cooker. You had people wrestling with the brand-new psychological discoveries of Sigmund Freud, all while dealing with deep, underlying anxieties about the fast-approaching modern age. It was a highly conservative society that essentially wore a mask of elegance. And before he became this huge rebel, Gustav Klimt was basically the guy hired to paint that mask. I mean, he grew up in poverty, but his talent was so immense. He painted traditional murals in Vienna's grandest theaters. He even earned the prestigious Gold Cross of Merit from Emperor Franz Joseph. But Klimt wasn't one for words. He preferred his art to speak for him, famously noting that whoever wants to know something about him ought to look carefully at his pictures. And man, what his art started saying deeply shocked the public. When he was commissioned to paint ceiling murals for the University of Vienna's Great Hall, he ditched the traditional academic style completely. Instead, he produced these radical, dark, overtly sexual images. The backlash was massive. Critics literally denounced the paintings as pornographic, and get this, they were never even installed.
Now you'd think after that kind of intense public outcry, an artist might retreat into something safe, right? Not Klimt. He doubled down. He ended up founding the Vienna Secession, which was a movement dedicated entirely to unconventional young artists. And this is when he entered his famous golden phase. Drawing inspiration from Byzantine mosaics he'd seen in Italy, Klimt developed this entirely new visual language. We're talking flat planes, heavy decorative patterns, and brilliant literal gold leaf. He started producing these glittering, highly erotic masterpieces like The Kiss and Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer Eye. It was brilliant, really. He took the highly controversial eroticism of his subjects and masked it right under breathtaking layers of gold.
But here's where the generational shift happens. While Klimt was wrapping his psychological themes and eroticism in beautiful gold and mythological allegories, his young protégés, Egon Schiele and Oskar Kokoschka, decided to strip those decorative layers away entirely. They didn't want the gold, they wanted the raw nerve. So where Klimt gave the world beautiful, intricate patterns, Schiele and Kokoschka delivered twisted forms, immense psychological tension, and a startling, unapologetic starkness. This is exactly what we now recognize as Expressionism.
Which brings us to Part 3, Schiele, the raw prodigy.
Born in 1890, Egon Schiele had what critics at the time described as a manic fluency for drawing, even from a super young age. He was mentored directly by Klimt, and you can see how Schiele took his teacher's really daring themes, but executed them in his own radical way. He used twisted body shapes, emaciated figures, and just a completely raw, in-your-face sexuality. He totally tossed out the polite gold leaf. Unsurprisingly, his bohemian lifestyle and the extremely stark nature of his work brought a lot of hostility. In 1912, this unvarnished approach literally landed him in prison. He was arrested, held in custody for 24 days, and it gets wilder. During his trial, the judge actually burned one of his erotic drawings over a candle flame right there in the middle of the courtroom.
Schiele lived fast, pouring an unbelievable amount of emotional intensity into his work, constantly exploring heavy themes like death and rebirth.
But tragically, his life was cut incredibly short. In the autumn of 1918, the devastating Spanish flu pandemic swept right through Vienna. Schiele actually sketched his pregnant wife Edith as she lay dying of the disease. And exactly 3 days later, Schiele himself succumbed to the illness. He was only 28 years old. Yet, in that short time, he left behind this astonishing, highly provocative body of work that still stops people in their tracks today.
Moving on to Part 4, Kokoschka, the Radical Survivor.
Let's look at Egon Schiele's contemporary, Oskar Kokoschka. While Schiele's story tragically ended in 1918, Kokoschka actually survived the initial tragedies of the era. He channeled his own deep, personal psychological turmoil into some of the most chaotic, tempestuous portraiture you will ever see. To him, art wasn't just about recording physical reality. He argued that painting isn't based on 3 dimensions, but on 4, with that 4th dimension being the essential, creative nature of vision itself. It was an exploration of the mind. To capture that inner psyche, Kokoschka would famously tell his portrait subjects to completely ignore him while he painted. He wanted them totally lost in their own thoughts, so he could capture their rawest, most vulnerable emotional states. Using exaggerated features and really frantic, nervous brushstrokes to make their invisible inner anxiety completely visible on the canvas.
And that intense psychological energy, it wasn't contained to just his canvas. It completely bled into his personal life, sometimes with bizarre results. After a highly tempestuous 3-year affair with Alma Mahler, who is the widow of the famous composer Gustav Mahler, she ended up leaving him. Kokoschka was absolutely inconsolable. His way of coping culminated in him actually commissioning a Munich doll maker to create a life-sized stuffed effigy of Alma. He gave the doll maker exact, highly specific dimensions, insisting it be stuffed with horsehair and down. It gets crazier. He actually dressed this doll, took it out in public with him, painted it, and then eventually decapitated it during a raucous party to finally hopefully exorcise his obsession.
Let's zoom out for a second and look at how all this fits into the wider historical timeline, because the backdrop here is just pure chaos. World War I begins in 1914. Kokoschka actually fought in it, taking a bullet to the head and a bayonet to the chest, and miraculously survived. Then 1918 hits. The Spanish flu takes the lives of both Gustav Klimt and Egon Schiele just months apart. That left Kokoschka as the last surviving titan of this trio. He kept painting through the decades right up until the rise of the Nazis. In 1937, they officially labeled him a degenerate artist, which forced him to flee his homeland just to survive.
Finally, Part 5, the Expressionist Legacy. Even though their time together in Vienna was cut so brutally short by war and the pandemic, the combined impact of Klimt, Schiele, and Kokoschka reverberated through the entirety of the 20th century. Just look at what they accomplished. They completely, permanently shifted the focus of art away from mere decoration. Heavily influenced by the dawn of psychoanalysis, they used the canvas to bravely explore the human unconscious. They depicted frank sexuality without a single apology. They put a spotlight on the modern anxiety that everyone was feeling, but absolutely nobody wanted to talk about. And above all, they challenged those rigid, conservative bourgeois norms, completely setting the stage for decades of abstract expressionists and neo-expressionists who would eventually follow their bold lead. The famous Viennese architect Adolf Loos, who was a massive champion and patron of these artists, once pointed out something fascinating. He said that while the purpose of a house is to serve your comfort, the purpose of art is to shake you out of your comfortable existence. Klimt, Schiele, and Kokoschka absolutely succeeded in shaking up the world. Which leaves us with a final thought for you to reflect on as you look at the culture around us today. What art makes you uncomfortable today? Because chances are, that is the exact art that's telling you the naked truth.